So now let's move to the second type of the negotiable instrument, that is the bill of exchange. Section 5 of Negotiable Instrument Act 1881 defines the bill of exchange. What is bill of exchange? An instrument in writing containing an unconditional order signed by the maker directing a certain person to pay a certain sum of money only to or to order of a certain person or to the bearer of the instrument is known as bill of exchange. More or less, the features of bill of exchange defined in section 5 are similar to the features of the promissory note defined in section 4 of Negotiable Instrument Act. Here also it should be in writing, there should be unconditional order, it must be signed by the maker, it must be a certain person to whom the payment is to be made, and the certain amount should be there, and it would be paid only to the certain person or on the orders of a certain person or to the bearer, means holder of the instrument. So sometimes bill of exchange is also known as the draft. There are few parties involved in the bill of exchange. Drawer, the person who draws the bill, that is known as drawee. Drawer, drawee, second party, on whom the bill is being drawn is known as drawee, and third party is the payee, at last to whom the payment is being made for that particular bill is known as payee. In few cases, drawee or payee can be the same person, but if the bill of exchange has been endorsed or been exchanged further, so this is being these two parties will be different. There are a few essentials of a bill of exchange. The first essential is it must be in writing, as every negotiable instrument requires to be in writing. So this is again the important feature of this. It must contain an unconditional order to pay. As in case of the promissory note, any condition attached to the payment of the bill of exchange will make it invalid. So any condition should not be attached with the payment of the bill of exchange. It must be signed by the drawer. Drawer is the person who draws the bill. So the signature of the drawer must be put on the face of bill of exchange. There must be three parties to the instrument and parties must be certain. Parties must be certain means to whom the payment would be made, the person who is drawing the bill, and on whom the bill is being drawn must be the certain one. The order must be to pay a certain sum of money. That means if it includes a certain sum of money, that means it is not the definite term, it is not a clear term. What is the meaning of certain sum of money? That means the amount which is to be paid must be clearly mentioned in the bill of exchange. The instrument must contain an order to pay money or money only. That means any kind of article, any kind of bonds, etc., in lieu of that money, if it is being mentioned in the terms of the bill of exchange, will not be a valid bill of exchange. It must comply with the formalities as regards date, consideration, and stamp, etc. So all these features will make a bill of exchange a valid bill of exchange. So this is a specimen form of bill of exchange. The place Chandigarh is being mentioned. May 31, 2009, the date on which the bill is being drawn. 3 months after date, pay to XY or order the sum of rupees 10,000 for value received. So here to Messrs PQ Chalk Sadar Merit, it is the person to whom on whom the bill is being drawn. It is being there is a space for signature, there is a space for stamp, a place is being mentioned, date is being mentioned, amount is certain, and the time is also being certain. That means all the essentials which we have read in the previous slide are mentioned here. So the presence of all those essentials make it a valid bill of exchange. So there is a difference between the promissory note and bill of exchange. Otherwise, mostly both these looks like the same. The features are almost the same, but still there are a few differences which clearly demarks them that these two are the different type of negotiable instruments. Let's read them. The first difference between promissory note and bill of exchange is the number of parties. In the promissory note, there are two parties involved, whereas in the bill of exchange, there are three parties: drawer, drawee, and payee. Next difference is the nature of payment. Promissory note is an unconditional promise to pay. Here, the maker of the promissory note promised to pay that I am promising to pay this much of amount. But in bill of exchange, it is not a promise; it is unconditional order to pay. So there is a difference. That means promissory note is an unconditional promise, whereas bill of exchange is an unconditional order. Acceptance. Promissory note doesn't require any kind of acceptance. Once it is being written, it is considered as accepted. But in case of bill of exchange, it is being sent for acceptance to the drawee before it is presented for payment. Next point of difference is the liability. Liability of maker is primary and absolute. That means the liability to pay for a promissory note is totally of the maker. But in case of bill of exchange, liability of drawer is secondary and conditional. Next is notice of dishonor. Notice of dishonor to the maker is not necessary, as if in case the promissory note got dishonor. So in that case, any kind of notice to the maker of the promissory note is not necessary to send. But in case of bill of exchange, notice must be given to all the persons who are liable to pay for that bill of exchange. Next difference is the maker's position. In case of promissory note, the maker stands in immediate relationship with the payee. That means there are two parties. One is the maker, second one is the payee. So there is a very immediate relationship between the maker and the payee in case of promissory note. But in case of bill of exchange, the drawer stands in immediate relationship with the acceptor and not with the payee, because in this bill of exchange the payee may be some other person. So in that case, the drawer has the immediate relationship with the acceptor, but the drawer is not immediately related with the payee. Next is nature of acceptance. The promissory note, it can never be conditional. Promissory note can never be conditional, but bill of exchange can be accepted conditionally. But there are only few cases about that. Next is the copies. A promissory note cannot be drawn in sets, but bill of exchange is drawn in sets. Payable to bearer. Promissory note cannot be made payable to the bearer, but it can be so drawn provided it is not payable to bearer on demand. Means this must be mentioned on the bill of exchange. Payable to maker. The maker cannot pay to himself. Means there must be at least two parties. One maker, another one should be the payee to whom the maker can pay for the promissory note. But in case of bill of exchange, the drawer and the payee may be the same person. Next difference is protest. No such protest is required in case of promissory note. But in case of bill of exchange, foreign bills must be protested for dishonor when such protest is required by the law of the place where they were drawn. Next and last is the applicability of certain provisions. Provisions like acceptance for honor are not applicable to the promissory notes. But in case of bill of exchange, these provisions are the must. They are applicable in case of bill of exchange. So all these points shows that there is a difference between the promissory note and the bill of exchange. Now we come to the third negotiable instrument, that is the check. Section 6 of Negotiable Instrument Act 1881 defines the meaning of the check. A check as a bill of exchange drawn on a specified banker and not expressed to be payable otherwise than on demand, and it includes the electronic image of a truncated check and a check in the electronic form. So it is a little different from the bill of exchange. So and the promissory note here, it is basically it basically involves a electronic image of a truncated check and the check in a electronic form. So what is the meaning of check in electronic form? It means a check which contains the exact mirror image of paper check and is generated in writing and signed in a secure system, ensuring the minimum safety standards with the use of the digital signatures. A truncated check, I have used this term. What is the meaning of a truncated check? It means a check which is truncated during the course of a clearing cycle, either by the clearing house or by the bank, whether paying or receiving payment immediately on generation of an electronic image for the transmission, substituting the further physical movement of the check in writing. So, a check means when a person who has the funds in the hands of the bank withdraws the same or some part of it. So, the whole process includes the functioning of the check. The check is a kind of bill of exchange. It has almost the same features of the bill of exchange, but it has two additional qualifications. One, it is always drawn on a specified banker, which was not valid in case of bill of exchange. It is always payable on demand without any days of grace. In bill of exchange, 3 days are being given for payment as days of grace, but in case of check, no such days of grace are allowed. There are a few features of a check which makes it valid. It must be drawn in accordance with the requirements of section 5 of the act. We have already read the definition given under section 5. So all the features must be present in a check. That means it must be drawn according to the requirements, according to the provisions of section 5 mentioned there. It must be signed by the maker. So the signatures are always the must in case of any negotiable instrument. So like in other negotiable instruments, the sign of the makers are must in case of check. It must contain an unconditional order for the payment of a certain sum of money. That means the amount to be paid must be mentioned there. It must also specify the banker upon whom it is drawn. So this is the additional condition which separates the check from the bill of exchange, that in case of bill of exchange, the banker is not required, but in case of check, any specified banker is required, and it must be mentioned on the face of the check that upon whom it is being drawn. Check must be addressed by one person to another. Next, checks are written on printed form supplied by the banks on their depositors. Every bank, whether private or public, have their printed forms of the checks, or these are being supplied by the bank. The format will be the same, but the presentation mode of the presenting area, the presenting way of the bank of regarding the check may be different. A check is not invalid by the reason it is post dated. That means every check can be a post dated check. What is a post dated check? Let's say today is 1st January. So if I draw the check today for 10th January, that means it is a post dated, the date is yet to come. That means this is a post dated check, and this is a totally valid check. This is a format of a check. Form of check, the following is a usual form of a check. Serial number is mentioned, date is mentioned, Central Bank of India, the mall Patiala, pay or bearer, to whom it is to be paid, how much rupees is to be paid, what is the account number. With this, there is always electronic image present on the face of the check. So now let's discuss the difference between the check and bill of exchange. The first point of difference between check and bill of exchange is the drawee. It is always drawn on a bank or a banker. Check is always drawn on a banker or on a bank, but bill of exchange can be drawn only on the individual persons, including a banker. Next is the acceptance. Check does not require any acceptance. Once it's drawn, the process is complete. but the bill of exchange, it must be accepted before the drawee can be made liable upon it. The payment, it is payable immediately on demand without any days of grace. In bill of exchange, there are 3 days of grace unless it is payable on demand, which is missing in case of cheque. The cheque on the date mentioned would be liable to pay. There are no grace days available in case of cheque. Crossing, a cheque may be cross-checked, but the bill of exchange doesn't include any such provision. Notice of dishonor. Notice of dishonor is not necessary in case of cheque, but in case of bill of exchange, it is necessary to give a notice of dishonor in order to make the drawer of a bill liable. Next difference is payable to bearer on demand. Cheque can be drawn payable to bearer on demand, but a bill of exchange cannot be so drawn. Stamp. In case of cheque, there is no requirement of the stamp. There is just the signatures of the maker which are sufficient. But in case of bill of exchange, it must be stamped by the authorized person. Countermanding payment. It may be revoked by countermanded of payment. The notice of customer's death or insolvency automatically require the bank not to make payment for the cheque, but the bank should receive such information before the payment of the cheque. But in case of bill of exchange, it cannot be countermanded. So, next point is noting and protesting. It is not noted or protested for dishonor and is generally inland. But in case of bill of exchange, there can be noting and protesting under section 99 and 100 of Negotiable Instrument Act 1881 in order to obtain the proof that a bill of exchange was dishonored, which is missing in case of cheque. Presentment. The drawer of the cheque is not discharged by failure of the holder to present in due time. If the drawer does not present it, if the drawee does not present it, the payment to whom is to be made, it does not present the cheque well in time, it would not discharge the drawer from his liability. But in case of bill of exchange, it should be duly presented for the payment, otherwise the drawer would be discharged from the liability. Protection. A banker is given statutory protection with regard to payment of cheque. But in case of bill of exchange, no such protection is being provided. So by now we have discussed the difference between the cheque and the bill of exchange. Now let's discuss the types of the cheques. The cheques can be of two types. Out of those, the first type is the bearer cheque. What are the bearer cheque? Bearer cheques are those cheques which are paid over the counter of the bank. That means the bearer cheque, in the bearer word says that the holder is the true owner of that particular negotiable instrument. Means in case I have lost my cheque, the person who will found it would be the owner of the check and can have the payment of that particular check. So the bearer check need not to be put through a bank account, means it is paid at the counter of the bank. Means let's say if I found some missing check of rupees 10,000, I went to a bank and I asked and I present the check for payment. If it is a bearer check, I would be paid rupees 10,000 on the counter of the bank. It need not to be go through the bank account. If the bearer check goes to the wrong hands, the holder in due course will get a good title in the check. Holder in due course would be the person who would find the check wrong, who would find the lost check. That person would have the good title of the check and he would be allowed to have payment for that particular check. Bearer checks are liable to great risk in the course of circulation. Means because it has a loss of it has a chances of loss of the check. So when the check is lost, it goes to the wrong hands, the drawer of the check can have the loss in form of the payment to the undesired parties. The finder or thief can get it in cash in the bank. That means the finder of the lost check or the thief of the lost check can have the payment on the over the counter of the bank. So the bearer checks are not considered as the safest form of check. Second type of check is the crossed check. So with a view to avoid the risks of the bearer check, the risk of theft, the risk of loss, so the for the protection of the owner of a check, the crossing of check system was introduced. So what is a crossing? Crossing is basically a direction to the banker not to pay the check over the counter, but to pay the check only to a particular bank account. Let's say I have lost my check, but if it is being found by someone else and is presented to bank for payment, so it would be transferred to the account number which is being mentioned on the which is being mentioned on the check, crossed check. It would not be paid over the counter. Through crossing, it can be easily detected that in whose account the money is being received, because the cross checks are to be gone through by the particular bank account, and to which account it is being posted, it can be clearly found out. So crossing does not affect the negotiability or transferability of a check. It can be easily